Thank you. We've got a comment here.
Thank you so much. From my side, what I want to just highlight is that, okay, let's say you report according to the size of your assets. The question is that what do we then do with those reports? Because obviously sustainability affects all of us. It's not about us getting companies to report. It's about changing behavior, and it came several times. So in a way, from who should be reporting, it's everybody. But then who's mandated to report? That's what should actually differentiate in terms of the size. But there's also another level to say, what do we then do to then change behavior using the same reports? Because filing the reports and then not assessing, not analyzing that the behavior is changing, that also will not move us to the Paris Agreement. So what the focus should be more to say, how do we create awareness to make companies commit to change behavior? Thanks.
Very useful comments there. Does anybody want to add to that observation? There we go, Yvette. Right in the corner.
Hi everyone. It's not to answer you on the score, but just to build on that point and a theme. I think my point here was just around, at what point all this reporting is aimed at investors and providers of capital, but at what point do they play a role in putting the pressure onto companies to change behavior? So I think that's where the pressure needs to come from, as opposed to necessarily regulation. But having said that, we're talking that they actually need the information. They need consistent and comparable information. So I think that's the aim of the regulation, is on sort of a subset of information that I think needs to be industry specific and jurisdiction specific. So obviously a South African approach. That's where the regulation should be helpful to the investors, but they really need to take that change in behavior forward. I don't think regulation is ever going to achieve that. So I don't know what body that is that we need to be talking to get their behavior changed, because I think that's quite an important part here. And then I think just to build on the analogy, integrated reporting is another example we have that we can look at. That was mandated, in inverted commas, through the JSE listing requirements. The question is, companies all did it that needed to do it. Did we see change in behavior? So I can say from my time at PwC as a consultant, yes, internally we started seeing companies realize, oops, we're missing information here. It's important information. Let's start getting the systems and processes into place. So I definitely think there has been behavior change. Enough across the board, I'm not sure. It depends on the company's approach. But I think that's another example we can look to, that mandating does have a positive effect. But again, it's the company's own values and drivers that are going to be responsive there. So just a few comments.
Perhaps I can also just come in on that comment, is to say, we're talking regulation very broadly and mandating, but I mean, what would that exactly look like? How would it be enforced? Is it going to be done through some kind of monitoring process with penalties, or is it going to be soft regulation in the sense that, well, if you don't comply, then you're going to naturally be excluded from certain activities, as we saw with the initial approach to Black economic empowerment, where you were kind of left out of certain sections of the economy if you didn't comply. So, I mean, is that what a consequence would be, or are we talking about now imposing penalties of some sort, financial penalties for non-compliance? Because I think regulation or having a regulation without enforcement doesn't really serve much purpose. So I see a hand went up. I don't know if it was in light of what I was saying or what Yvette was saying. Yes.
Yeah, I think just to pick up on some of those points and some of the other points raised earlier, I think everyone in the audience is probably aware that the company's amendment bill is at an advanced stage, and one of the changes they're proposing there is changes to the Social and Ethics Committee. So one of the things they have proposed is that it becomes a statutory committee. So in other words, the members of that committee, and remember, as social and ethics is all tied to the public interest score. So that's public and private over a certain level. So I think it's at least it's a baseline in which to move from, if I can call it that. The statutory membership means that obviously your shareholders will, pretty much like we're going to see in the REMCO and the Auditcom, have an opportunity to vote people, board members out if they're not doing it. But perhaps even more profound is that, and I haven't seen that yet, but part of these changes is they're going to prescribe what this reporting or the social and ethics report is, which at this stage has to be tabled at the AGM, needs to look like. So maybe some of the answers will lie in there. I think just coming back to some of the other points that have been raised, and I think to Annelie and those comments of what we're seeking to achieve here, I think we must also just, apart from just understanding what we're wanting to achieve from this thing, simply reporting against a standard, whether mandatory or whatever, is really, in my sense, almost treating the symptoms rather than fixing or finding the cure. I can tell you that there are a lot of investors in this country who, when we engage with as public listed companies, are really not interested in the sustainability, the ESG, or other reports. They've openly said to me that as long as you don't appear in the Sunday Times front page, we're happy. As a part of all of this, I think I'm not convinced in listening to the debates over the last 2 days that the investor community or stakeholders, if you want to go even wider, really fully appreciate the implications, ramifications, benefits, and detractions, if I can call it that, coming back to the cost-based advantage and all of those discussions. So I think there's a lot of work that has to be done here. I think a lot more sensitizing, a lot more education, a lot more deep dive into what the benefits financially or otherwise will be. And then let's see what comes out of this company's amendment bill.
Thank you very much for that. We haven't heard from anybody that's attending via live stream. I don't know, are there any questions coming through? I think we checked to see if there was anything that came through earlier. Okay, doesn't sound like it. As I said, I don't think that this discussion is necessarily going to find the solution, but it does bring in a couple of different perspectives that need to be considered as the work continues. I think in line with one of the earlier comments yesterday, this isn't the end of the journey. This is probably the start of the journey in the South African context, and well, at least in light of what we're trying to achieve here. And yeah, just some observations over here is that we need to make sure that stakeholder needs are being addressed, and to the more recent comment, understanding, or the stakeholders need to be aware of what questions they need to be asking in order to understand what their needs are. So it becomes a bit of a chicken and egg situation, but acknowledging that just in light of the ISSB standards, if we take the discussion around the ISSB standards for the moment, which I think has also prompted a lot of our discussion here over the course of the last 2 days. Investors obviously are key stakeholders in that regard, and the current metrics that we use for investor reporting are probably going to be the starting point. But I think looking at individual industries, looking at individual jurisdictions, we've got regulators from the FSCA, from the JSE, then of course the broader, all other companies that aren't necessarily aligned to those two jurisdictions. It's about finding that common ground so that we don't end up in a situation where you've got different regulatory requirements coming from all sorts of different angles, which then absolutely will increase that regulatory burden, that red tape, which we said is the particular constraint that needs to be observed over here. Are there any other comments that anybody would like to add? Yes, Alexi.
thought on the public interest score concept. I think probably something that we could do is go back and unpack and look at what actually informed the thinking around that, and that might actually reveal some interesting ideas around how one could approach it in the context of sustainability reporting. Because, I mean, that score was designed to some extent to address financial reporting and assurance thereof, and yet we refer to it as a public interest score. And so understanding what we mean by public interest, and that might actually bridge the gap and answer some of the questions that arose in this discussion around whether the ISSB's materiality perspective is perhaps an issue or a stumbling block here, or maybe it isn't, you know. But certainly would want to avoid a blunt instrument that just says use the same score. I think it needs to be refined for the context of sustainability reporting. And then just another idea that came out, just to add to that, is to say one could also look at potentially a process where your smaller entities, or your entities with a lower score, whatever you call that score, there might be something in regulation that says if there's a particular application process for that entity to, you know, from a stakeholder group, for that entity to start reporting, then that could be mandated on a case-by-case basis for those entities, you know. So I think there's a lot that can be done if we just think out the box a bit as well.
Thank you for that. Yes, comment here.
Hi, thanks. I think just in response to some of the comments over the last couple of days and the discussions, which has obviously been very rich, I think we must just make sure that we don't make the mistake of, when we talk about investors, seeing investors as being these, you know, huge groups of, you know, nameless, faceless people. If we look at the South African capital markets, the majority of money sloshing around in the capital markets comes from three major sources: retirement funds, bank deposits, and insurance funds. So those all relate back to individual human beings behind all of them, right? So what we need to understand, and I think the thing that we need to probably balance out, is that there is a definite need to get a return on an investment in all of those spaces. You know, we might look at philanthropy and impact investing slightly separately, where you're willing to maybe give up returns in order to have a different impact. But in all three of those spheres, there is a need to get a financial return. It's not necessarily, though, that it's a financial return at any cost. And I think what we need to kind of balance out is maybe the effect of time. And we've talked, you know, at various times about sort of long-term thinking, you know, having to, I guess in our case, you know, often deliver short-term returns, but make sure that we can also continue to do that in the future for the outcome of members of a retirement fund, for example. So we need to just I guess, find a way to navigate that conversation, to say, how do we balance that out? Because a healthy retirement fund, a healthy business, profit, all these things ultimately translate into social and environmental benefit in many cases, not in all cases. In some cases, you know, it's profit just for the sake of building wealth upon wealth upon wealth. But the ordinary person is really looking to save for their retirement fund so that they can be comfortable once they go into retirement. They're looking to contribute to an insurance policy so that they are covered adequately in the event of some unforeseen event. And they're saving, you know, through their bank deposits for something specific in terms of the outcome of their life. So I just think there's something complex there that we're missing. You know, it's not just investors that, you know, are these, you know, big groups of companies that make these decisions and that have all this power. We act on a mandate from our stakeholders. And I think that's maybe where there's the crux of some of the issue is, you know, how do we give investors or investment managers a mandate to think differently, not only think about the short, medium term, but also think about the much longer term. This is already established in parts of regulation in South Africa, but it's not necessarily, policed particularly well. And I think there's some learnings there, you know, in terms of how we can maybe move forward here. In terms of, you know, just overall, you know, regardless of what kind of investor you are, consistency in information, I think, is always welcome. Comparability is always welcome. But exactly how we do that, I think, is something that we need to work out.
Thank you very much for that. I guess one of the challenges we're going to experience, as well as I'm sure many other countries are going to experience, is, you know, are we going to get it right the first time? Possibly not. We might find that we'll have various versions or various iterations of the process that will evolve. I mean, we saw that when we, you know, with the BEE approach that's been taken. And I guess even financial reporting to a certain extent has gone through various iterations. It wasn't, you know, South Africa went straight to IFRS. It kind of evolved. So it's one of those things which I think we're going to benefit from the experience of what others do, but we can't sit and wait to watch what the rest of the world does, because then we're going to have to catch up or at least be left behind. So it's one of those balancing acts where we're going to need to make some short-term decisions initially in terms of those sectors of the economy where we believe that there is a greater need, and possibly focus on that first and then evolve that beyond there. And I think that at least that's my perspective in terms of how I think it's probably going to play out. An opportunity for closing comments. I think we're about 1:45, which is I think where we were aiming to be at to close off the section. I've got about another 2 minutes left before I hand back the mic from my side. Okay. Thank you very much oh, there we go, another comment there. Thanks, Cynthia.
I think it's actually a question that hasn't been answered. And I know that the CIPC have taken lead to organize this conference, but we heard that the Companies Act doesn't cater for any, let's say, organization or government body to actually lead the charges in terms of the sustainability standards in the country. So I guess that's really, for me, another open question. Who within our government stakeholders is going to lead the charges, and when are we going to know? I think that's, for me, my question, because that will help us to start moving in the right direction as well. Thanks.
I think that's my understanding of what these task group or working groups and the white paper is all going to be working towards. So I think that's the question that needs to be answered by the outcome of this conference. So just to echo that. Thank you very much, everybody, all the panelists for this session, everybody that spoke up and shared their thoughts and perspectives. I think it's just the start of the conversations, and I think the contributions by everybody are going to be paramount to advancing the work of this group. Thank you very much. Over to you.